Thank you for coming back with us. Over 44,000 people have been killed in the conflict in Gaza, including over 43,000 Palestinians and over 1,000 Israelis. Former President Trump has said in an interview, quote, "Get it over with and let's get back to peace and stop killing people. And that's a very simple statement," end quote. The former president labels himself as the most, quote, pro-Israel president in the nation's history, end quote. How effective will the former president be in handling in the war in Gaza? And on the other hand, Vice President Harris has been criticized by many pro-Palestinian voices for the Biden administration's handling of the conflict in Gaza. She says she'll support Israel, but also wants a ceasefire to end the war. Dr. Call, I'd like to start with you. In your professional opinion, which candidate seems to be more effective in handling the conflict?
It is almost impossible to tell in this situation because no movement has been possible in such a long time in this conflict more generally, but also since the war has broken out in Gaza specifically, we've seen the Biden administration being unable to broker any kind of deals with the Israeli government in order to stop the violence in Gaza and in surrounding areas. So it's unclear if any policies would be able to come from the United States that would actually have an impact in Israel and Gaza. We've had a very long-standing relationship with Israel, and both parties have been pretty staunchly pro-Israel for most of their history. But we see now potentially Harris moving a little bit on this. So it's unclear what we'll see coming up in the future because we haven't seen any examples of successful policies really in the region. So we don't really know what to look for at this point.
Thank you. And Paul, I'd like to hand it over to you and hear your response to that.
Well, I think without a doubt, President Trump, during his presidency, was the most pro-Israel president there was. They reached agreement with a number of the Arabic countries on the Abraham Accords. They signed peace treaties. He moved the capital and the U.S. Embassy into Jerusalem, and he was very, very supportive of Israel. I think, unfortunately, October 7th happened, and Israel is now recoiling from the biggest genocide event in their history since the Holocaust, where 1,700 people were killed by Hamas. And it's very difficult to live in proximity to people who have sworn that they want to kill you and wipe your country off the face of the map. It's really a question, Israel versus Hamas, of whoever dies last wins. The Hamas people, even the reconstituted Hamas today, which are on their fourth or fifth leader since the IDF and the Mossad have taken out all their leaders, they're still unwilling to give back hostages. They're still unwilling to negotiate a ceasefire, and they're telling their people to fight to the death. And if they are about to lose and there are hostages, to kill the hostages, as we have seen. These are not people that you can negotiate with, and they have to be eradicated. And I think a lot of this stems from direction that they are getting as they're driven by Iran, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Sufis. All their surrogate armies are pointed at Israel and the United States, the great Satan. So it's very difficult to win wars against people who say they're not afraid to die and their only mission is to kill you.
And Dan, I noticed that Paul's response struck a chord with you. I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the word eradicated really is troubling. And it's troubling that one party has basically said, yeah, well, U.S. policy might have said a two-state solution is best for the region, but we're just going to throw our hands up, and whoever dies last survives. And I think when over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, over half of which are children, I don't know, how many Israeli folks are worried about the children of Palestine coming to kill them. I think by indiscriminately bombing the region, by taking actions out of proportion to horrible, horrible attacks on October 7th that both parties have strongly denounced, taking such dramatic actions that the international community has called acts of war or war crimes, a true disproportionate response. Again, the indiscriminate bombing and starvation of a population of people that, again, over half of which are children. This has been unquestioned a brutal instance of ethnic cleansing that the Israeli people have perpetrated on the people of Palestine. And again, this isn't a stance on how strong we should support the Israeli state. This is a reality of what Benjamin Netanyahu has been bringing to the Gaza Strip, not just since October 7th, but for several years as they have expanded settlements throughout the West Bank and expanded and expanded and expanded, literally creating a jail, an open-air prison that 2 million people cannot go in or out of freely. There are Palestinians that live under Israeli settlements that have to walk as Israeli settlers on their land, throw trash under and onto them. The treatment is awful. The response from the Israeli military has been incredibly out of proportion. And I don't think the United States can look at that and say, this is what it has to be, and maybe if we close our eyes a little bit and pretend like it's not happening, that this will be over quickly, as the president wants, as the former president said.
Thank you. And I'd like to shift gears a little bit and go a little ways around the world and talk about Russia. Mistrust in the elections and their results has become a topic of discussion. According to government officials, Russia is the top international threat to the U.S. election. They've tried to manipulate the election using fake websites, as well as by pushing misleading content on social media. Intelligence officials and private security analysts have concluded that Russia does support the former president. He has also praised Russian President Vladimir Putin. Dan, I'd like to ask you, is the association between the former president and the Russian president concerning?
If you stand for democracy, I think it is. Look at what's happening in Ukraine now. North Korean troops are joining the Russian military to fight Ukraine. And we have a major party candidate who very well might, when the votes are all added up, become the next president, who won't stand against Russia, North Korea, and China, but will join this axis. And the fact that we have, again, a president that has clearly admired dictators, that has spoken highly of Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, it's very concerning, and it's not surprising why the Russian government would prefer Donald Trump when they know and they've seen that at the slightest bit of flattery, well, they pretty much have him in his pocket. And so I think there's been a lot of bluster by the Trump campaign about strong leadership, but I think all we've seen is someone who berades our allies, calls them so-called allies, tries to pull us out of long-standing peace treaties that have kept the world safe, and instead talks about being a dictator and talks about his admiration for dictators around the world.
And Paul, I would like to hear your response to Dan.
Well, I think Dan has really got the White House talking points down pretty well. Under Trump, there were no wars. He was feared. He was feared by Russia. He was feared by China. And he was feared by Kim Jong-un. And because he can pick up the phone and call these people and deal with them, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be able to confer with your opposition. Otherwise, you're going to spin out into World War III, which is exactly what is happening under Biden now. his appeasement of Iran and his unwillingness to fully support Taiwan and his dragging his feet in the Ukraine by not giving the Ukrainians the weapons they needed to beat Russia and protect Europe have made Europe and Asia tinderboxes. None of that existed under Trump. And, you know, it started with loss of respect for the United States when we pulled out of Afghanistan with our tail between our legs and left hundreds of thousands of Afghans and American citizens there with the Taliban. There had not been one soldier's death in the 18 months prior to the leaving at Tehran at the airport. And that was because Trump literally threatened the Taliban that if anything happened to an American citizen, there was going to be consequences that was going to be far beyond a normal response. So people are afraid of Trump in the world. And that's not a bad thing when you have dictators. I do not believe that that Iran would have had Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas attack Israel if Donald Trump were president, and I don't believe that Vladimir Putin would have gone into the Ukraine.
And Dr. Call, I would like to hear your response to both of their talking points.
I do want to press back on the idea that Donald Trump sees Viktor Orban and Putin as opposition, as you stated in your statement. He definitely does not see them as the opposition in his own statements, in his own platform, in the Republican platform. He has discussed liking the approach that people like Viktor Orban and Putin have to politics. Viktor Orban is a dictator in Hungary who consolidated power under his own hands as the executive in a process known as executive aggrandizement, which is part of a global phenomenon of democratic backsliding, which is an extreme problem. And the fact that we are trying to model ourselves or to be friends with people that are also dictators and have turned democracies into not dictators is troubling, regardless of what the position is on foreign policy. I'm going to let you two go ahead and debate it out on that. But in terms of relationships with dictators, that has been something that Trump has said that he is into. He likes talking to Viktor Orban. He looks at Viktor Orban as somebody else in the region that he can look to for his position as well. They feed off of each other. And so, yes, it is part of a larger problem of democratic backsliding around the world, really.
Thank you all.